You stand on a muddy, rutted track. The chill air bites at your exposed skin, and the scent of wood smoke mingles with something less pleasant, perhaps unwashed bodies or fear. Ahead, a long line of figures trudges forward, staff in hand, worn cloaks billowing in the wind. These are pilgrims driven by faith, by hope, by desperation. You join them on a journey to a holy shrine, believing it will cleanse your soul or grant a miracle. But beneath the veneer of piety and devotion, these sacred journeys harbored a shadowy underbelly. This is not the story of simple spiritual seeking. This is a journey into the hidden truths, the profound dangers, and the shocking deceptions that awaited those who sought salvation on the medieval road. Despite the hidden truths, the profound dangers, and the shocking deceptions awaiting you on the road, an even more powerful force compelled you to embark on such a journey. You lived in a world saturated with the sacred, a world where the veil between the earthly and the divine felt thin, almost transparent. Your life, from birth to death, was inextricably woven into the fabric of the Church, its teachings and its formidable authority. This was not a world of abstract theology or detached spirituality. It was a visceral, immediate reality, shaped by the ever-present threat of eternal damnation and the overwhelming yearning for salvation. You are a medieval man or woman, and your worldview is stark, uncompromising. You know with absolute certainty that after this fleeting existence, your immortal soul will face a divine reckoning. Every sin, every transgression, every impure thought, carries a weight, a stain upon that soul. And the consequences, you are taught from your earliest days, are terrifying. You fear the fires of hell, a place of unimaginable torment reserved for the damned, where suffering is endless and hope is extinguished forever. You also comprehend the concept of purgatory, a grueling, purifying fire where souls must endure immense pain to atone for their lesser sins before they can enter the glory of heaven. It is a terrifying prospect, a fate you are desperate to avoid or, at the very least, to shorten. This profound fear of divine judgment, coupled with a deep, unwavering faith in God's mercy, formed the bedrock of your motivation. Pilgrimage in this context was not merely a spiritual exercise, it was a lifeline, a tangible act of penance that could potentially shift the balance in your favor. You saw it as a desperate plea, a strenuous undertaking designed to appease an often wrathful God and earn a measure of forgiveness. Consider the weight of your own transgressions. Perhaps you committed a grave sin, theft, violence, adultery, or even murder. In the medieval legal system, a secular court might demand a pilgrimage as penance, often to a distant and arduous shrine. This was not just a punishment, it was a chance for spiritual rehabilitation, a way for you to seek God's forgiveness and potentially avoid a harsher earthly penalty, or more importantly, eternal damnation. You might be ordered to walk barefoot, to wear a specific penitential garment, or to carry a heavy burden, each step a further act of atonement. Imagine the burning shame, the crushing guilt, driving you forward, the hope that with every agonizing mile, the burden on your soul might lighten. But not all pilgrimages were born of such dramatic circumstances. More often, you undertook the journey for the accumulation of smaller, everyday sins that gnawed at your conscience. You lied, you coveted your neighbor's ox, you harbored resentment, you missed your Sunday obligations. These were the daily failings that, unchecked, could still condemn your soul to purgatorial suffering. A pilgrimage offered a powerful, tangible way to address these spiritual debts. It was a tangible act, a physical manifestation of your remorse and your desire to be clean. The very act of walking, of enduring hardship, was seen as meritorious, a sacrifice pleasing to God. You understood that simply wishing for forgiveness was not enough. You had to work for it, to demonstrate your sincerity through suffering. Beyond the weight of sin, you were also driven by a desperate hunger for divine intervention, a longing for miracles in a world where suffering was commonplace and medicine was rudimentary. Your child lay dying, racked by fever. Your crops had failed for 3 seasons straight, threatening starvation. You suffered from a chronic ailment that made every day an agony. The local physician offered only dubious remedies and grim prognosis. Where else could you turn but to the heavens? You heard countless stories, verified by the Church, of saints performing miracles through their relics, even centuries after their deaths. A blind man regained his sight at the tomb of St. Thomas Becket. A crippled woman walked again after visiting the shrine of Santiago de Compostela. A barren couple conceived after praying at a Marian shrine. These were not mere folk tales. They were testaments to the power of faith, living proof that God's grace could manifest through His holy servants. You believed, with every fiber of your being, that if you could just reach that sacred place, touch that holy relic, or simply kneel in prayer before the tomb of a revered saint, a miracle might be granted to you too. This hope, vibrant and potent, fueled your weary steps, pushing you through exhaustion and despair. The potential for a miraculous cure, for relief from physical pain or the alleviation of profound sorrow, was an irresistible lure, a beacon in a dark and difficult world. Pilgrimages were also undertaken out of obligation, often a vow made in a moment of extreme crisis. Perhaps you were caught in a terrible storm at sea, your ship tossed violently by the waves, certain you would drown. In that terrifying instant, you cried out to God, promising to undertake a pilgrimage to a specific shrine if only you and your crew were spared. Or perhaps your village was ravaged by plague, and you vowed to journey to a distant shrine dedicated to a patron saint of healing if your family was spared. These vows, once made, were sacred and unbreakable. To renege on such a promise was considered a grave sin, risking divine wrath and further misfortune. So, even when the immediate crisis had passed, you felt honor-bound, spiritually compelled, to fulfill your solemn pledge. The journey therefore became an act of gratitude and a reaffirmation of your faith. Furthermore, the Church itself could mandate a pilgrimage as a form of penance or punishment, as we have touched upon. If you were found guilty of a serious offense in an ecclesiastical court, the spiritual judge might order you to travel to a specific holy site, perhaps wearing a penitential mark or carrying a staff indicating your status as a repentant sinner. This was a public act of contrition, a visible sign of your commitment to atonement. Imagine the shame and humiliation of such a journey, yet also the desperate hope that it might ultimately lead to spiritual absolution. Beyond individual needs and obligations, there was a powerful collective impetus. Pilgrimage was deeply ingrained in the social and cultural fabric of medieval Europe. To undertake a pilgrimage was to participate in a shared spiritual experience that resonated throughout society. Your neighbors, your family, your community, many had either been on a pilgrimage or knew someone who had. There was a sense of spiritual merit, even prestige, associated with having visited a major shrine. You might gain wisdom, new perspectives, or simply the satisfaction of having walked in the footsteps of countless generations of devout souls. And then there were the relics. Oh, the relics! The medieval world was obsessed with them. These were not just old bones or fragments of cloth. They were believed to be tangible conduits of divine power. A sliver of the true cross, a thorn from Christ's crown, a bone from a saint's body, a vial of their blood, a piece of their clothing. Each relic possessed a unique spiritual potency, a direct connection to the divine. Great churches and cathedrals across Europe vied with each other to acquire and display the most prestigious relics, drawing pilgrims from hundreds, even thousands of miles away. You believed that by simply being in the presence of these relics, by touching them, by praying before them, you could gain indulgences, remissions of time in purgatory, or receive divine grace and healing. The closer you were to the source of the saint's power, the greater the potential benefit. This belief in the physical efficacy of relics was a cornerstone of medieval piety, and it transformed these sacred objects into potent magnets for the faithful. The journey, then, was not merely to a place but to an object, a fragment of the holy that promised profound spiritual benefits. So you walked. You joined the endless stream of humanity for reasons both deeply personal and universally understood. You walked out of profound fear, out of desperate hope, out of unbreakable vows, and out of a burning desire for salvation. You sought to cleanse your soul, to heal your body, to fulfill your obligations, and to touch the divine. These were the powerful, undeniable imperatives that set your feet upon the muddy, dangerous roads of medieval Europe. The road ahead was fraught with peril, but the spiritual stakes were simply too high to remain at home. You have committed to the journey. The spiritual stakes are indeed too high to remain at home. But the moment your settlement's last thatched roof disappears behind you, the abstract concept of peril transforms into a cold, hard reality underfoot. This is not a paved avenue built for easy passage. This is the raw, untamed landscape of medieval Europe, a network of tracks, muddy paths, and rutted lanes that crisscross continents, each one a testament to the sheer will of those who traveled them. Imagine the feel of the earth beneath your worn boots. One day, it is a churned morass of mud clinging to your feet, sucking at your soles with every weary step. The next, it is a bone-jarring mosaic of sharp stones, punishing your arches with relentless impact. Rain, an incessant companion, transforms the path into a slippery, treacherous ribbon, turning even a gentle slope into a dangerous slide. You splash through puddles that hide unseen depths, or you navigate around treacherous bogs that threaten to swallow a horse, let alone a human. The wind, when it whips across open fields, carries with it the biting cold of winter or the parching heat of summer, forcing you to huddle deeper into your meager cloak or to seek any scrap of shade. This road is rarely empty, but the company it offers is a dubious blessing. You walk with a constant vigilance, your senses alert to every rustle in the trees, every distant hoofbeat, every shadow that lengthens too quickly. For the medieval road, while a conduit for faith, was also a hunting ground for desperation. Bandits and highwaymen lurked in every dense forest, behind every rocky outcrop, their eyes keen for the glint of a silver coin, the promise of a sturdy pair of shoes, or even just the meager provisions you carry. They preyed upon the weak, the isolated, the slow, seeing your pilgrimage not as a sacred quest but as an opportunity for plunder. You might join a larger group, a caravan of pilgrims for safety in numbers, but even then, a concerted attack could overwhelm even the most vigilant party. Stories of pilgrims stripped bare, beaten, or worse, were not just cautionary tales. They were grim realities that echoed along every mile. But humans were not the only predators. The wild heart of Europe beat fiercely beyond the cultivated fields. Wolves, lean and hungry, stalked the edges of the forests, their howls a chilling symphony under the moonless sky. Bears, disturbed from their slumbers, could be a sudden, terrifying presence. Even less glamorous creatures like venomous snakes or disease-carrying rats posed a significant threat, unseen until their bite or the illness they brought took hold. You learned to keep a wary eye, to carry a stout staff not just for walking, but for defense against an unexpected charge. But humans were not the only predators. The wild heart of Europe beat fiercely beyond the cultivated fields. Wolves, lean and hungry, stalked the edges of the forests, their howls a chilling symphony under the moonless sky. Bears, disturbed from their slumbers, could be a sudden, terrifying presence. Even less glamorous creatures like venomous snakes or disease-carrying rats posed a significant threat, unseen until their bite or the illness they brought took hold. You learned to keep a wary eye, to carry a stout staff not just for walking, but for defense against an unexpected charge. The sheer physical toll was immense. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, as you measured your progress not in leagues, but in blisters, aches, and an ever-present weariness that settled deep into your bones. Food was often scarce and monotonous. Stale bread, hard cheese, perhaps a dried fish if you were lucky. Water, if not drawn from a clean well in a village, could be suspect, carrying with it the invisible seeds of sickness. Dysentery, that insidious scourge of medieval travel, could strike without warning, dehydrating and weakening you until even the simplest steps became an agonizing effort. Fevers, coughs, and a host of other ailments were constant companions, their symptoms exacerbated by exposure and the relentless grind of the journey. There were no doctors along these remote stretches, no pharmacies, no comforting beds when sickness took hold. Your only remedies were prayer, the resilience of your own body, and the kindness of strangers, if you were fortunate enough to find it. Consider the simple act of crossing a river. There might be no bridge, or the one present might be a rickety, ancient structure barely capable of bearing your weight. You might be forced to ford the rushing current, the icy water reaching your waist or chest, threatening to sweep you off your feet, soaking your precious few possessions and chilling you to the bone. Imagine scaling a mountain pass, the narrow path winding perilously close to a sheer drop, the air thin and cold, every breath a gasp of effort. Or traversing a dense forest where the trees overhead blotted out the sun, disorienting you, making every rustle and creak sound like an approaching threat. There was no accurate map, only the occasional waymarker, or the vague directions offered by a local who might or might not have understood your destination. Getting lost was not merely an inconvenience. It could be a death sentence, leading you deeper into uninhabited wilderness, away from food, water, and safety. Then there was the constant vulnerability of your possessions. You carried everything you needed on your back or in a small sack. A change of clothes, a few coins, perhaps a small personal devotional object, some food. Each item was precious, hard-won, and difficult to replace. A torn shoe could cripple your progress. A lost blanket could mean a night of shivering misery. Theft or damage to your few belongings was not just an annoyance. It was a profound setback that could jeopardize the entire pilgrimage. Hospices and monasteries, scattered along the major pilgrimage routes, offered some respite. These were havens, often founded by charitable donations, where weary pilgrims could find a bed, a simple meal, and spiritual comfort. But these were not hotels. They were often crowded, basic, and offered for only a night or two before you were expected to move on. They also weren't everywhere, meaning long stretches of road stretched between these points of succor. You might have to beg for your supper at a village door, hoping for Christian charity, or sleep under the stars, your only roof the vast, indifferent sky. The weather itself was an enemy. A sudden blizzard could trap you for days, burying paths and making travel impossible, threatening you with frostbite and hypothermia. A prolonged drought could dry up streams and wells, leaving you desperate for water. Torrential rains could swell rivers, making them impassable, or turn pathways into impassable quagmires. You were utterly at the mercy of the elements, stripped of the comforts and protections of your settled life. And through it all there was the gnawing fear. Fear of the known dangers and fear of the unknown. Fear of succumbing to illness in a strange land far from family. Fear of being robbed, injured, or simply disappearing without a trace. This fear was not a fleeting emotion. It was a constant companion, a heavy cloak draped over your shoulders, pressing down with every step. Yet it was a fear you had to push through, to overcome, to ignore. The medieval pilgrimage was not a spiritual retreat in the modern sense. It was an epic journey of endurance, a profound test of faith and fortitude. Every blister, every ache, every hungry night, every close call with danger was seen not just as a hardship, but as a part of the spiritual purification. Each trial deepened your resolve, strengthened your prayer, and forged an unshakable connection between your physical suffering and the spiritual reward you sought. The road was a crucible, burning away weakness, sharpening your focus on the ultimate destination, salvation. It was a journey into the wild, raw heart of the world, and into the raw, unvarnished core of your own spirit. You continued to walk, your feet heavy, your body protesting, but your spirit, perhaps, growing stronger with every obstacle overcome. You walked because the promise of grace, the hope of forgiveness, and the chance to touch the divine outweighed every imaginable danger. You walked through the ruin of the roads toward the hope of salvation, knowing that the very difficulty of the path was part of its sacred purpose. You have endured the path, testing your spirit against stone and weather. Your body has become a vessel for your unwavering devotion, and your mind is fixed on the divine promise at the journey's end. But as you finally approach the hallowed gates, as the spires of the cathedral pierce the sky, you begin to realize that this destination is not merely a haven of spiritual solace. It is also a thriving economy, a bustling marketplace built entirely upon your faith, your hope, and your desperate need for grace. The sacred, you will soon discover, is inextricably intertwined with the commercial. Before you lies a spectacle of devotion, certainly, but also a vibrant, sometimes chaotic enterprise. Pilgrimage sites were the economic powerhouses of the medieval world, magnets drawing not just souls, but also coins, offerings, and an endless stream of commerce. Here, the pursuit of salvation intersected with the pursuit of profit, creating a unique and often morally complex system. The centerpiece of this entire economy, the very reason you have endured such hardships, is the relic. These are not merely mementos. They are fragments of the sacred, tangible links to the divine. You imagine touching a bone from a saint, a splinter from the true cross, a lock of hair from a holy woman. These objects, you are taught, possess immense power. They can heal the sick, forgive sins, even shorten your time in purgatory. They are the conduits through which God's grace flows directly into the world. And the demand for them is insatiable. Every major cathedral, every monastery, every aspiring shrine understands that its very existence, its fame, and its fortune depend on the potency and prestige of its relics. To possess the remains of a famous martyr or a piece of an object directly connected to Christ himself is to hold an unparalleled treasure. It is to draw multitudes and with them unimaginable wealth. Imagine the scramble. Bishops and abbots engage in fierce competition, sometimes even resorting to outright theft, to acquire new relics. Tales abound of pious frauds, where monks would sneak into rival churches under the cover of darkness, spiritedly making off with the bones of a revered saint. These were not considered crimes in the modern sense. Rather, they were often framed as divine interventions, the saint himself choosing a new, more deserving home. Miracles would then conveniently confirm the legitimacy of the transfer. But the supply of genuine first-class relics was, of course, finite. The market, however, was not. This created an inevitable, thriving black market and a culture of widespread forgery. How do you distinguish a true splinter of the true cross from a piece of common oak? How do you verify the authenticity of a bone fragment claimed to be from St. Peter? For you, the weary pilgrim, consumed by faith and hope, such questions are often overshadowed by the desperate desire to believe. You might be presented with not one but dozens of alleged fragments of the true cross, each accompanied by its own elaborate tale of provenance. You might encounter multiple heads of John the Baptist, or several complete skeletons all attributed to the same saint. The sheer volume of these sacred objects strains credulity, yet the faithful, yearning for tangible connection, often choose belief over skepticism. The Church itself, though aware of the problem, often turned a blind eye, understanding that the economic benefits far outweighed the theological inconsistencies. After all, if the relic inspired genuine devotion, did its absolute authenticity truly matter? For many the answer was no. As you navigate the crowd surrounding the great shrine, you realize that your entire journey has culminated in this exchange. You have brought your prayers, your penance, and your meager savings. In return, you seek a blessing, a touch, a sacred souvenir. Around the central reliquary, you find stalls overflowing with small, affordable tokens. Lead badges stamped with the image of the saint, vials of holy water or oil, little pouches of earth from a sacred spot. These are not just keepsakes. They are miniature conduits of grace, meant to extend the blessing of your pilgrimage long after you return home. The sale of these items, from the simplest badge to the most elaborate reliquary, fuels the local economy. Every step you take within the pilgrimage town, you are contributing to its prosperity. Innkeepers eagerly await your arrival, offering rough beds and hearty, if overpriced, meals. Taverns buzz with the chatter of pilgrims and merchants alike, their proprietors counting the day's profits. Vendors hawk everything from candles and incense to more substantial goods, knowing that pilgrims, having made it this far, are often willing to spend what little they have for a perceived spiritual advantage. Money changers set up their tables, converting your regional currency into the local tender, taking a small cut with each transaction. This intricate web of commerce sustains not only the merchants in the town, but crucially the church itself. Offerings collected at the shrine, donations given in exchange for specific prayers or blessings, and the direct sale of religious articles generate immense wealth. This wealth, in turn, funds the construction of grand cathedrals, the maintenance of monasteries, and the elaborate ceremonies that draw even more pilgrims. It is a self-perpetuating cycle where faith generates wealth and wealth in turn helps to propagate faith. But beneath the surface of this thriving enterprise lies a darker truth, a quiet exploitation that is deeply woven into the fabric of medieval society. For many, pilgrimage is a last resort, a desperate gamble for redemption. You may have traveled thousands of miles, spent your last copper coins, enduring unimaginable suffering, all for the hope of a miracle, a cure, or the forgiveness of a grievous sin. The Church, in its teachings, offered a direct pathway to redemption. But the actual practice often involved a commercial transaction. Indulgences, for example, which offered a reduction in the time your soul would spend in purgatory, could be obtained through pilgrimage, specific prayers, or most controversially through monetary donations. While initially intended as an act of penance, the system quickly devolved into a perceived buying and selling of salvation. You could, quite literally, pay your way out of suffering, or at least reduce its duration for yourself or a deceased loved one. This created an implicit class system within salvation itself. Those with more wealth could afford more extensive pilgrimages, greater offerings, and more powerful indulgences. The poor, who had little to offer beyond their suffering, were often left to hope that their arduous journey and fervent prayers alone would suffice. The cost of salvation, it seemed, was not equal for all. Con artists and tricksters also thrived in this environment of desperate faith. False preachers, peddling fraudulent relics or promising instant cures for a fee, would often mingle among the genuine pilgrims. You might encounter a man claiming to possess a fragment of the seamless robe of Jesus, or a woman selling miracle water bottled from a common stream. Their targets are the most vulnerable, the sick, the grieving, the truly desperate, who are often too immersed in their suffering and too hopeful for a solution to question the sincerity of such claims. Even within the legitimate church, the line between genuine spiritual offering and commercial transaction could blur uncomfortably. Pilgrims were not just encouraged to pray at the shrines, they were also subtly, or sometimes overtly, encouraged to leave a suitable offering. The size of the offering could be seen as a reflection of the pilgrim's devotion, or perhaps, the measure of grace they hoped to receive. You, the pilgrim, stand at the heart of this paradox. You are here for profound spiritual reasons, yet you are inextricably caught in a vast economic machine. Do you feel exploited? Perhaps. Do you feel conflicted? Possibly. But more likely you feel a potent mix of hope and urgency. The objects, the ceremonies, the commercial exchange, all serve a greater purpose in your mind, to connect you to the divine, to secure your salvation. The dark secrets of medieval pilgrimages are not necessarily secrets of malice, but secrets of human nature, the potent blend of profound faith, practical economics, and the ever-present temptation of exploitation. You observe the throngs of people, each carrying their own burdens, their own hopes. You see the rich nobleman dropping a heavy purse into the collection box, and the peasant woman leaving a single worn coin. Both seek the same thing: solace, forgiveness, a tangible connection to the sacred. And in this complex, often contradictory world, the Church, through its relics and its rituals, offers precisely that. It sells hope, and for medieval humanity, that was a commodity beyond price, even if its acquisition sometimes came with a heavy cost. You understand now that the road to salvation in this age, was paved not only with good intentions and arduous journeys, but also with gold, silver, and the powerful, enduring belief in the miraculous. The road to salvation you have seen was paved with intentions both good and grasping, with genuine belief and with the powerful draw of the miraculous. But where there is such profound demand, where the very promise of eternity is at stake, a shadow inevitably falls. You learn quickly that the yearning for the sacred, for a tangible connection to the divine, was so potent that it created a market ripe for exploitation. This is where faith meets fraud, where devotion can be twisted into deception, and where the line between the holy and the profane blurs until it is almost invisible. You walk through the bustling streets, past the grand cathedrals and the humble parish churches, and you notice something pervasive. Every church, it seems, possesses a relic. A bone of a saint, a fragment of cloth, a vial of holy oil, a piece of the true cross. These are not mere mementos. For the medieval mind, relics are power. They are conduits of divine grace, capable of healing the sick, warding off evil and performing miracles. To touch a relic, to pray before it, is to bridge the gap between the earthly and the heavenly. Imagine the competition. Every town, every abbey, every diocese wants its own saint, its own miracle worker, its own holy object to draw pilgrims. Pilgrims mean prestige. Pilgrims mean donations. Pilgrims mean the economic lifeblood of a community. The demand for relics, therefore, is insatiable. But there is a fundamental problem you quickly grasp. There are simply not enough authentic relics to go around. Saints, even prolific ones, only have so many bones, so much hair, so many pieces of clothing. The supply cannot possibly meet the ever-growing demand. And so, the stage is set for an industry of deception, an underground economy fueled by pious longing and earthly greed. You begin to hear whispers, to observe the subtle cues that reveal the dark secrets of these holy objects. How were these relics created? The methods were varied, ranging from crude to cunning. Sometimes, it was outright fabrication. A local priest might discover the bones of an unknown martyr conveniently buried beneath his church altar. An ordinary skull, perhaps of an animal or an anonymous deceased person, could be relabeled and presented as a powerful saint's cranium. You see market stalls where vendors discreetly offer fragments of St. Peter's beard, or tears of the Virgin Mary, in tiny sealed ampoules. The buyer, often a desperate pilgrim or an ambitious church official, wants to believe. And in the medieval world, belief is a potent force that often overrides critical inquiry. Then there was the practice of augmentation. Even if a church possessed a tiny, genuinely authenticated fragment of a saint, the desire for a more impressive display could lead to embellishment. A sliver of bone might be embedded in a larger, carved piece of wood or ivory, and the entire composite presented as the saint's shin bone. You might encounter a fragment of cloth truly believed to be from a saint's tunic that has been repeatedly pressed against other cloths, creating a multitude of secondary relics, each claiming a fraction of the original's power. It becomes a chain reaction, a holy multiplication, where authenticity grows thinner with each successive touch. Perhaps most disquieting is the sheer number of identical relics you encounter. You visit 3 different cathedrals hundreds of miles apart, each proudly displaying what it claims to be the head of John the Baptist. You see countless pieces of wood, each revered as a fragment of the true cross, far exceeding the plausible amount of timber that could have come from one crucifixion. The sheer absurdity of it, when viewed with modern eyes, is striking. Yet, for many, it was not a contradiction but a testament to the miraculous proliferation of God's grace. The motivations behind these forgeries were complex. Certainly there was blatant economic gain. A church with a famous relic could attract thousands of pilgrims, their offerings filling the coffers and revitalizing the local economy. The abbot or bishop overseeing such a shrine would gain immense prestige and power. But sometimes the motivations were less cynical. A priest in a struggling parish might genuinely believe that providing his flock with a powerful relic, even if it was of dubious origin, would bolster their faith and bring them closer to God. This was sometimes termed pious fraud, deception for a supposedly good end. You observe the traveling holy men and women who journey from town to town, performing their own brand of spiritual theater. They are the false prophets, claiming direct visions from God or special powers to heal and bless. One might offer you a vial of holy water from a distant miraculous spring, for a small donation, of course. Another might touch you with a gnarled stick, claiming it was used by a saint, promising to cure your ailments. Their performances are often theatrical, their pronouncements dramatic, and their audience, desperate for relief from suffering and fear, is often willing to suspend disbelief. You see the spectacle unfold. A man seemingly lame suddenly throws aside his crutches after a blessing from a self-proclaimed prophet. A woman, her face etched with worry, is told her child will recover after purchasing a specially blessed charm. The atmosphere is charged with emotion, with hope and desperation commingled. How much of it is genuine, you wonder, and how much is carefully orchestrated manipulation? The Church itself was not entirely blind to these abuses. Councils and synods occasionally issued decrees against false relics and fraudulent miracle workers. You hear of bishops attempting to verify the authenticity of relics in their diocese, though such efforts were often hampered by a lack of scientific methods and an overwhelming desire to believe. Some truly did try to curb the trade in fake relics, recognizing the spiritual damage it inflicted. Yet, the system was so deeply entrenched and the benefits of a popular shrine so immense, that widespread reform proved elusive. Many church leaders, while perhaps privately skeptical, found it expedient to tolerate or even tacitly endorse relics that brought pilgrims and prosperity to their institutions. You realize that for the average pilgrim, distinguishing between the genuine and the fraudulent was an almost impossible task. They came with open hearts and minds, their faith often their greatest vulnerability. They had endured arduous journeys, faced dangers on the road, and spent their meager savings, all in the hope of divine intervention. To question the authenticity of a relic or the sincerity of a holy man would be to question the very fabric of their faith, to invite doubt into a world that offered little certainty. As you stand before another golden reliquary, holding what is purportedly a finger bone of St. Andrew, you contemplate the layers of belief and deception. Is the power truly in the bone, or in the fervent faith of the one who gazes upon it? Are the miracles real, or are they a trick of the mind, a desperate hope manifesting as a physical sensation? The medieval world, you understand, was a place where miracles were expected, where the divine constantly intersected with the mundane. And in such a world, the line between God's truth and man's clever lie became dangerously thin, leaving pilgrims vulnerable to those who would exploit their deepest spiritual longings for earthly gain. The bones of contention were not just the relics themselves, but the very integrity of faith, constantly under assault by the forces of human weakness and avarice. The integrity of faith, constantly under assault by the forces of human weakness and avarice. And it was this weakness, this unshakable faith, that proved to be the most fertile ground for exploitation, a field ripe for harvesting by those who claimed to be shepherds, but often acted as wolves. You stand in the throng, your purse a little lighter with each passing day, a gnawing worry beginning to settle beneath your fervent hope. Imagine yourself arriving at a renowned shrine, having journeyed for weeks or even months. Your feet ache, your clothes are travel-worn, and your soul yearns for the spiritual solace you were promised. But before you can even kneel at the altar, you are met with a series of demands, each one chipping away at your meager savings. You pay for the privilege of entry, a fee simply to step onto consecrated ground. You are expected to make a substantial donation at the relic itself, perhaps to touch the sacred object or receive a special blessing. Then there are the votive candles to purchase, each one a tiny flame of hope that costs you yet more coin. The journey itself was a commerce in motion. Every ferryman, every innkeeper, every baker along the pilgrim road understood the deep pockets of the faithful. You might find a humble bed in a monastic guest house, but even these pious institutions often charged what the market would bear. The monks who welcomed you might offer a blessing, but their hospitality often came with an expectation of a generous contribution, especially if you sought a particularly potent prayer or a vision of a secondary relic. Your desperation was their opportunity. The economy of the pilgrimage routes hummed with this quiet exploitation. Vendors sold cheap trinkets masquerading as blessed objects, water from a holy spring that was merely local well water, and food at exorbitant prices. You are hungry, tired, and acutely aware that this is a sacred journey. You are less likely to haggle, less inclined to question the pricing, for fear of offending the divine or appearing ungrateful for the opportunity to suffer for your faith. Consider the very act of venerating a relic. You have seen the throngs, felt the crush of bodies eager to glimpse a bone, a splinter of wood, a fragment of cloth. These holy items were rarely free to view. They were guarded by priests or monks who understood their immense drawing power. Access often meant a donation, a tithe, a payment to have a mass said in your name, or a prayer offered for a loved one. The more famous the saint, the more miraculous the supposed power, the higher the implicit or explicit cost of spiritual proximity. Sometimes the exploitation was far more direct and insidious. You might encounter traveling pardonas, men with smooth tongues and impressive-looking documents, claiming to represent the Pope himself. They would offer you indulgences, not merely blessings but a direct reduction of your time, or the time of your deceased loved ones, in purgatory. For a specific sum of money, a piece of parchment would be handed over, supposedly a ticket to salvation, a guaranteed shortening of suffering in the afterlife. The fear of eternal damnation, or the anguish of imagining a loved one trapped in purgatorial fire, was a powerful motivator, and these pardonas played upon it with ruthless efficiency. You listened to the sermons, tales of sin and redemption, of the torments of hell and the joys of heaven. The fear instilled by these powerful narratives made you even more susceptible. If a priest told you that a specific offering would ensure your salvation or heal your child, or bring prosperity to your farm, how could you refuse? To hold back your coin would be to risk eternal damnation, to show a lack of faith in the very intermediaries of God's grace. It was a cruel irony. The deeper your faith, the more vulnerable you became to those who would twist it for personal gain. The very structure of the medieval church, with its vast network of shrines and cathedrals, benefited immensely from this pilgrim economy. Monasteries became wealthy thanks to the steady stream of pilgrims and their offerings. Bishops and abbots, often from noble families, saw pilgrimage sites as powerful engines of revenue, competing with one another to acquire the most impressive relics and draw the largest crowds. You might see two churches in neighboring towns, both claiming to possess a piece of the true cross, each demanding your veneration and, of course, your donation. The competition was fierce, and the pilgrim was often caught in the middle. Think of the sheer number of fake relics in circulation. If a church already possessed a few genuine holy items, it was remarkably easy to discover more. A local farmer digging in his field might stumble upon an old bone, which with a bit of clever storytelling and the blessing of a local clergyman, could become the finger of an obscure saint, suddenly drawing crowds and coin. The stories would spread like wildfire, carried by returning pilgrims, each tale embellishing the miraculous power of the new discovery, fueling the demand for more holy objects and more opportunities to exploit the faithful. You walk through a bustling market outside a cathedral, the air thick with the smell of roasting meat and the murmur of prayers. Here, amidst the chaos, you see other forms of exploitation. Beggars, some genuinely destitute, others professional mendicants, would accost you, invoking the name of God and the saints to pry open your purse. You might encounter charlatans claiming miraculous cures for a fee, offering potions or spells that promised healing beyond what any relic could provide. In this cauldron of faith and desperation, distinguishing genuine spiritual aid from cynical trickery became an almost impossible task. The wealthy, too, were not immune. though their exploitation took different forms. They might pay for elaborate prayers to be said perpetually for their souls, or commission expensive stained glass windows depicting their own pious acts, subtly reminding future generations of their generosity while ensuring their place in heaven. For them, it was less about meager savings and more about securing influence and a legacy, even as the offerings still funneled into the coffers of the powerful. The Pilgrims, however, were the lifeblood of this system. Their heartfelt belief, their earnest desire for salvation, healing, or forgiveness, was the commodity being traded. They embarked on these perilous journeys, often at great personal sacrifice, driven by a profound spiritual need. They sought connection with the divine, a tangible sign of God's favor, a reprieve from the harsh realities of their lives. And it was precisely this pure, unshakable faith that was so often betrayed, not by God, but by the very institutions and individuals who claimed to speak in His name, twisting spiritual longing into a transactional enterprise. You look at the worn faces around you, etched with hope and weariness, and you wonder how many of them, like you, feel a subtle unease. How many are beginning to question the relentless financial demands, the endless opportunities to give more, to buy more? The medieval world was a place of deep faith, yes, but also one where the lines between piety and profit were constantly blurred, where the shepherd's fleece was all too often a costume for the opportunist. The pilgrimage, intended as a path to spiritual enlightenment, often became a gauntlet of monetary extraction, leaving the faithful poorer in coin and perhaps, with a whisper of disillusionment in their souls. The path you walk as a pilgrim is not just paved with prayers and pennies. It is also lined with promises. Promises of salvation, of healing, of a direct connection to the divine. And at the heart of these promises lie the holy relics, the tangible fragments of saints and sacred events, revered as conduits of God's power. For the medieval mind, these were not mere objects. They were potent, living connections to the miraculous. Imagine standing before a reliquary, intricately carved and glittering with jewels, holding what is claimed to be a bone of St. Peter, a piece of the true cross, or perhaps a vial containing the very blood of Christ. The air in the cathedral is thick with incense and anticipation. You feel a tremor of awe, a profound sense of proximity to the sacred. You might touch the reliquary or even the relic itself if you are deemed worthy, believing that a portion of its holiness, its healing power, will transfer to you. This belief fueled the entire system of pilgrimage. People traveled hundreds, even thousands of miles, enduring immense hardship, not just to visit a sacred site, but to encounter these holy wonders, to experience their miraculous efficacy firsthand. The stories abound. A crippled man walks again after touching a saint's femur. A blind woman regains her sight after venerating a lock of the Virgin Mary's hair. A village is saved from plague by the procession of a martyr's skull. These accounts, often amplified and embellished by local clergy, spread like wildfire, drawing ever more pilgrims and with them, ever more offerings. Each miracle attributed to a relic elevated its status, increased its renown and, crucially, enhanced the wealth and prestige of the church that housed it. The competition among pilgrimage sites was fierce, a relentless pursuit of the next big miracle, the most compelling relic, the most powerful holy object to attract the faithful and their fortunes. You might encounter relics of truly astonishing variety. Bones, naturally, were paramount. Skulls, femurs, teeth, fingers, entire skeletons of saints were diligently collected and distributed across Europe. Then there were objects associated with Christ Himself or the Virgin Mary, splinters of the true cross, thorns from the crown of thorns, pieces of the manger, swaddling clothes, even vials purporting to contain the Virgin Mary's milk or tears. You would hear of relics so intimate, so profoundly personal, as to strain credulity even among the devout. A feather from the Archangel Gabriel's wing, the sound of St. John the Baptist's laugh, a preserved drop of St. Stephen's sweat. The fervent belief in these objects was genuine. It was a cornerstone of medieval spirituality. In a world fraught with illness, famine, and violence, where scientific understanding was rudimentary, the promise of divine intervention through a tangible object offered solace, hope, and a sense of control over an otherwise unpredictable existence. To dismiss these beliefs as mere superstition would be to misunderstand the profound faith that animated medieval society. For many, these relics were real, powerful, and utterly essential to their spiritual lives. Yet, lurking beneath this devout veneration was a darker truth, a truth that gradually began to dawn on some, even as they knelt in prayer. Not every relic was what it claimed to be. In fact, many were outright fabrications, clever deceptions designed to exploit the very faith they purported to serve. This was the mummery, the elaborate fraud, that often accompanied the miracles. Consider St. John the Baptist. His head was one of the most highly sought-after relics. It was revered in Rome, in Amiens, in Constantinople, in numerous other locations across Europe. As you contemplate the impossibility of this, you begin to grasp the sheer scale of the deception. How could one man have so many heads? The answer, of course, is that most, if not all, were forgeries. The same applied to the true cross. If all the claimed fragments of the true cross were gathered in one place, they would be enough to build a small fleet of ships. Far more would than could have ever constituted a single crucifixion cross. You would find multiple holy foreskins of Christ, countless vials of the Virgin Mary's milk, and an astonishing proliferation of fingers and toes belonging to the same saints. The motivations behind these widespread forgeries were complex, but often boiled down to familiar human failings: greed, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of power. A church possessing a renowned relic could attract immense numbers of pilgrims, and with them substantial wealth through offerings, gifts, and the sale of indulgences and commemorative items. A city with a particularly potent relic could rise in prominence, becoming a spiritual and economic hub. Bishops and abbots competed fiercely to acquire new relics, sometimes through legitimate purchase, but often through less scrupulous means, including theft, falsification, and elaborate storytelling. The process of creating a fake relic could be remarkably sophisticated. Bones of animals, particularly those of sheep or goats, were sometimes artfully shaped to resemble human bones. Dirt from holy lands was packaged as sacred soil. Ordinary stones were proclaimed to be from the Mount of Olives. Skilled artisans created intricate reliquaries to house these dubious items, lending an air of authenticity through craftsmanship and expense. Stories were fabricated, often involving divine visions or miraculous discoveries, to explain the sudden appearance of a new, powerful relic. There was little to no scientific verification in an age before carbon dating or forensic analysis. A compelling narrative and the endorsement of a powerful bishop were often enough to establish a relic's legitimacy in the eyes of the faithful. You might ask, where was the church in all of this? Did its leaders not see the obvious frauds? The reality was complicated. While some church reformers and theologians did express skepticism and even outrage over the proliferation of fake relics, the institution as a whole often struggled to police the situation effectively. Verifying relics was a monumental task, and local churches often had vested interests in maintaining the illusion. In some cases, the church itself inadvertently contributed to the problem by officially sanctioning relics based on flimsy evidence or political expediency. The Council of Trent, much later, would attempt to address some of these abuses, but for centuries the trade in relics, both genuine and fraudulent, flourished largely unchecked. So, as you walk through a medieval city approaching a grand cathedral, you carry with you not just your hopes, but also a growing awareness of this peculiar duality. You see the genuine devotion on the faces of your fellow pilgrims, their desperate pleas for healing, for salvation. And you see the elaborate displays, the ornate reliquaries, the priests earnestly extolling the virtues of their treasures. You hear the stories of miracles, but perhaps you also remember the whispers you overheard in a tavern, or the cynical remark of a merchant about the holy business. The question hangs in the air, unspoken but persistent: are these true miracles or are they mere mummery? Is the power you feel emanating from that revered bone the genuine article, or is it merely the amplified belief of generations, skillfully manipulated by those who stand to gain? This was the uncomfortable truth that many pilgrims, knowingly or unknowingly, grappled with. Their faith was tested not by doubt in God, but by doubt in the human agents who claimed to represent Him. The line between the truly sacred and the cunningly fabricated was often blurred beyond recognition, intentionally so. For many, the very act of pilgrimage, the journey itself, became a testament to their unwavering faith, a commitment that transcended the authenticity of any single relic. They hoped for a miracle, yes, but perhaps they also found a deeper, more personal truth in their endurance and devotion, a truth that no amount of false relics could diminish. Yet, the sting of potential deception, the knowledge that their earnest longing could be so crassly exploited, must have been a heavy burden for many devout hearts. It reveals a profound paradox at the core of medieval religious life, a boundless capacity for belief existing side by side with an equally boundless capacity for human artifice and manipulation. You leave the shrine, perhaps with a small, purchased vial of holy water, or a medal depicting the local saint. The experience has been powerful, overwhelming even. But as you rejoin the dusty road, a seed of contemplation has been planted. You have witnessed the deep wellspring of human faith, but also the shadowy depths of human cunning. The journey continues, but your perspective has subtly shifted. You now understand that even in the quest for the divine, one must always remain vigilant against the all-too-human. Your journey has shown you the fervor of belief and the shadow of deceit. But medieval faith held an even more complex, more coercive side, one where the divine quest became intertwined with earthly judgment. Sometimes, the path you walk was not chosen freely, but imposed upon you as a sentence, a grueling form of medieval justice. For centuries across the European landscape, a different kind of pilgrim walked the roads, not seeking salvation out of pure devotion, but forced to undertake a spiritual odyssey as punishment for a crime or a sin. This was not a pilgrimage of choice, but one of coercion, a penance, or even a form of exile masquerading as spiritual endeavor. Imagine yourself standing before a grim-faced judge, perhaps a powerful lord or a stern bishop. You have been accused of a grave transgression, perhaps a violent assault, an act of theft, or even a deep heresy that challenged the very fabric of society. The penalty for such deeds could be swift and brutal, the loss of a hand, a public flogging, or even the gallows. But sometimes, especially for offenses against God or the Church, a different sentence was handed down, one that offered a slender hope of redemption alongside crushing hardship. You are ordered to go on pilgrimage. This was not an invitation, it was a decree. The destination was not yours to choose. It might be a distant shrine, perhaps the tomb of St. James in Compostela, the revered relics of Rome, or even the holy sites of Jerusalem itself. The journey was your punishment, your penance, your chance to atone through suffering. It was a fascinating, often brutal, blend of judicial severity and spiritual mercy, a way to remove an offender from society while compelling them to seek divine forgiveness. You are stripped of your ordinary clothes. Instead, you are given the distinctive garb of a pilgrim, a coarse tunic, a cloak, a staff, and a scrip bag for alms. But your attire holds an additional, far heavier burden. Sewn onto your clothing, or perhaps worn around your neck, are specific symbols of your crime. A heavy leaden cross for murder, its weight a constant ache against your chest. Perhaps a pair of iron shoes, their cold metal a constant, grating reminder with every single step. Or even a wooden sword or a knife, crudely fashioned, to represent the weapon you wielded. These are your marks of shame, visible to every person you encounter. As you step out onto the dusty road, you are not merely a traveler, you are an outcast. Your identity as a penitent pilgrim precedes you. The eyes of strangers follow you, sometimes with pity, more often with suspicion or scorn. There is no anonymity for you. Your penitential uniform broadcasts your transgression to the world, a constant source of public humiliation that chips away at your spirit with every passing mile. This public shaming was a deliberate part of the punishment, forcing you to confront your guilt not just inwardly, but through the judgment of every person you meet. The physical demands of such a journey are immense. You walk day after day, week after week, across unfamiliar landscapes. Your food is scarce, often reliant on the unpredictable charity of strangers or the meager coins you possess. You sleep rough, exposed to the elements, vulnerable to bandits and wild animals. The cold bites at your bones, the sun bakes your skin, the rain soaks you to the core. Each blister, each aching muscle, each gnawing pang of hunger is meant to be part of your atonement, a physical manifestation of the spiritual suffering you are meant to endure. And yet, this physical ordeal is only half the battle. The psychological toll is equally crushing. You walk alone or perhaps with a small group of other condemned souls, each burdened by their own guilt and shame. The silence of the road amplifies your thoughts, forcing you to confront the gravity of your actions. You grapple with remorse, regret, and the fear of what awaits you if you fail to complete your arduous task. There is the constant question of whether your suffering is truly enough to earn divine forgiveness, whether this forced pilgrimage will truly cleanse your soul. For the medieval church and for secular authorities, such pilgrimages served multiple purposes. They removed dangerous or undesirable individuals from the immediate community, sending them far away. They offered a religiously sanctioned alternative to the death penalty or harsh physical mutilation, giving offenders a chance for spiritual redemption. It was believed that the sheer act of enduring such hardship, coupled with prayer and devotion at holy sites, could purify even the most stained soul. It was a grand, often brutal, experiment in transforming punishment into spiritual growth. The length of your sentence could vary dramatically. For a minor offense, you might be sent to a nearby shrine for a few weeks. For a grave crime like murder, you could be condemned to years of wandering, or even a lifetime of exile, perpetually seeking absolution from one sacred site to another. Sometimes the journey was so perilous, the conditions so harsh that the pilgrim never returned. The pilgrimage itself became a slow, drawn-out death sentence, perhaps a more merciful one than the gallows, but a death nonetheless. But what happens if you survive? What happens when you finally reach your designated shrine, having walked hundreds or even thousands of miles? You perform your devotions, offer your prayers, and perhaps seek a letter of absolution or a specific token from the shrine to prove your completion. This proof was vital. Without it, you risked being rearrested and facing even harsher penalties for failing to fulfill your sentence. Imagine the relief, the exhaustion, the profound sense of accomplishment as you hold that small, perhaps damp piece of parchment or leaden badge in your hand, signaling the end of your penance. Your journey home, however, is a different kind of trial. You are still marked by your past. Though you carry proof of your completed penance, the stigma of your crime may linger. Society might cautiously readmit you, or you might find yourself forever on the margins, an object of suspicion and whispered stories. The pilgrimage was meant to cleanse, but it also left an indelible mark, a permanent scar on your social identity. So, was it penance or prison? In truth, it was both. It lacked the physical walls and cells of a traditional jail, but it imposed a far vaster, more demanding confinement. The endless road, the judgment of the world, and the unyielding burden of your own conscience. It was a prison of suffering and exposure, a sentence that offered the possibility of divine grace, but at a tremendous human cost. It reveals a profound aspect of medieval life, where justice was not merely about retribution, but about the arduous, often desperate, pursuit of spiritual cleansing in a world deeply intertwined with sin and redemption. You have traversed the physical landscape, endured the social ostracism, and carried the weight of your past on your weary shoulders. But the deepest, most insidious burdens of the medieval pilgrimage were not always visible. They were etched not onto your skin, nor your tattered clothes, but into the very fabric of your mind and soul. Imagine the raw, unceasing mental anguish that accompanied every single step, every long day, every freezing night on the road. This was not merely a physical trial, nor a public display of contrition. It was a profound internal struggle against the demons of your own making, amplified by the relentless demands of the journey. You carried your guilt like a leaden cloak, heavy and suffocating, wrapping you in its chilling embrace even under the brightest sun. Every ache in your bones, every blister on your foot, every gnawing hunger pang could be interpreted as a divine punishment, a physical manifestation of your unworthiness. The solitude, even when surrounded by other pilgrims, could be overwhelming. Each person on this path was locked in their own private battle, their own desperate quest for atonement. You might walk for days without exchanging more than a few essential words, each lost in the labyrinth of their own thoughts, haunted by their own transgressions. The silence of the open road, broken only by the creak of cart wheels or the distant bleating of sheep, became a vast echoing chamber for your darkest fears and regrets. You had ample time, perhaps too much time, for introspection. Days bled into weeks, then months, offering an agonizingly slow mirror to your soul. You replayed your sins in an endless loop, dissecting each transgression, searching for nuance, for mitigating circumstances, for any shred of comfort. But the medieval mind, steeped in the stark realities of sin and judgment, offered little leniency. Instead, you found only confirmation of your fallibility, your inherent weakness, your profound need for God's grace. Fear was a constant companion, a cold knot in your stomach. It was not just the fear of bandits or hunger or sickness. It was the existential dread of eternal damnation. Had you truly repented enough? Was your suffering sufficient in the eyes of an all-powerful, all-seeing God? What if, despite all your efforts, your soul was still tainted, still destined for the fires of hell? This terrifying question gnawed at you day and night, stripping away any nascent hope, leaving you adrift in a sea of despair. Sleep offered little respite. When exhaustion finally claimed you, your dreams often became vivid, terrifying landscapes populated by your sins and the specter of divine wrath. You might relive the moment of your transgression with agonizing clarity, or wake in a cold sweat from a nightmare where demons pursued you, whispering accusations, dragging you toward an abyss. These nightly torments blurred the line between waking and sleeping, making the entire journey feel like a protracted, waking nightmare. The sheer unpredictability of the road also played havoc with your mental state. One day you might find kindness and charity. The next you could face hostility, robbery, or betrayal. This constant oscillation between relief and danger, between moments of spiritual solace and brutal reality, created an environment of profound psychological stress. Your nerves were perpetually frayed, your senses heightened, always on alert, always expecting the worst. This hypervigilance slowly eroded your sense of peace, leaving you perpetually anxious. Doubt was a particularly cruel tormentor. After weeks or months of hardship, when your body ached and your spirit flagged, the insidious voice of doubt would whisper, "Is this truly working? Is God even listening? Am I merely enduring pointless suffering?" This existential questioning could be more debilitating than any physical injury. It threatened to undermine the very purpose of your ordeal, rendering your immense sacrifices meaningless. To confront such doubt was to stand on the precipice of utter spiritual collapse, a fall from which there might be no return. The longing for home, for familiarity, for the comfort of a known bed and a friendly face, was a persistent ache. You might recall the faces of loved ones, the scent of your own hearth, the sound of your village church bells. These memories, sweet as they were tinged with bitterness, reminding you of the life you had forsaken, perhaps irrevocably. The emotional toll of this separation, this exile, compounded the mental strain, leaving you feeling rootless and profoundly alone. You were expected to maintain an outward appearance of piety, of humble devotion, even when your internal world was a maelstrom of fear and despair. To complain, to show weakness, was to risk invalidating your penance, to suggest you lacked true contrition. So you masked your suffering, maintaining a stoic facade, pushing down the screams that echoed in your mind. This suppression of natural human emotion added another layer to your psychological burden, creating a profound dissonance between your inner turmoil and your outward presentation. The physical deprivations themselves contributed significantly to your mental anguish. Chronic hunger clouded your judgment and frayed your temper. Constant cold or heat made rational thought difficult. Sleep deprivation led to hallucinations, paranoia, and a distorted perception of reality. Your weakened body became a prison for your troubled mind, each feeding the other in a vicious cycle of suffering. You were literally starved for comfort, for peace, for relief. Consider the mental exhaustion of endless decision-making. Which path to take, where to find water, where to seek shelter, whom to trust. Each day presented a new series of challenges, each demanding your attention and depleting your already limited mental reserves. You could never truly rest your mind, always having to navigate the complexities and dangers of the road, always assessing risk. This mental grind was relentless, chipping away at your resilience day by day, hour by hour. Some pilgrims, unable to bear the weight of such profound psychological pressure, succumbed to madness. The mind, pushed beyond its limits, could shatter. You might witness others on the road, their eyes vacant, their words nonsensical, their spirits broken. The fear that such a fate could befall you too, that your sanity might unravel under the relentless assault of guilt and hardship, was a terrifying possibility that hung heavy in the air. The experience was a relentless assault on your sense of self, stripping away all pretenses, forcing you to confront your deepest flaws and fears. There was no escape, no hiding place from yourself. You were utterly exposed not just to the elements or the judgment of others, but to the unvarnished truth of your own soul. This naked confrontation, while perhaps ultimately leading to spiritual growth for some, was an intensely painful and destabilizing process for all. Even after you reached your holy destination, after you completed your rituals, after you received your certificate of absolution, the psychological scars remained. The journey had fundamentally altered you. You carried not just the physical weariness but a deep internal memory of profound suffering, of having faced down your inner demons in the crucible of the road. Your perspective on life, on sin, on salvation, was irrevocably changed. Returning home, you might find yourself a stranger in your own land. The familiar comforts now felt alien, the everyday concerns trivial compared to the existential battles you had fought. You might struggle to reconnect with loved ones, finding it difficult to articulate the depth of your experiences, the profound transformations you had undergone. The journey had taken you to the darkest corners of your psyche, and that journey continued, albeit in a different form, long after your feet had left the pilgrim road. The medieval pilgrimage was, in essence, a prolonged exercise in psychological torment, designed to break the individual down to their most fundamental core, to strip away all worldly attachments and illusions. Only then, it was believed, could true penitence flourish. It was a brutal form of therapy, a spiritual crucible forged in suffering, a journey into the self as much as a journey across lands. And the shadows it cast on the soul were long, extending far beyond the winding paths and dusty roads of the past. The mental anguish was perhaps the most enduring legacy of all. The profound personal transformation, the crucible of the soul you experienced on the pilgrim road, was often a deeply private ordeal. Yet, the act of pilgrimage itself, particularly for those of status and power, was anything but. It was a grand public spectacle, a deliberate performance on the stage of medieval Europe, where faith and politics were inextricably bound. Imagine yourself now not as a humble penitent, but as an observer in the royal court, or perhaps even as a trusted advisor. You witnessed the king, a figure of immense worldly authority, making a public vow. He pledges to undertake a pilgrimage, perhaps to a distant shrine, perhaps to Rome itself. This is no private spiritual yearning. This is a strategic declaration, a carefully calculated move on the chessboard of power. Why would a king whose every action echoed with temporal might embark on such a journey? For some, it was genuine piety, a desperate plea for divine intervention in times of war or plague, or a fervent hope for an heir. For others, it was a profound act of penance, a public confession and atonement for grievous sins, perhaps a murder or a betrayal that threatened to unravel the very fabric of his rule. You see the elaborate preparations, the retinue that must accompany him, the careful planning of the route, the negotiations with local lords for safe passage. This is not just a journey, it is a moving embassy, a display of wealth and influence even in supposed humility. Consider the political leverage of such an act. A powerful monarch, brought low by a grave sin, excommunicated by the Pope, found himself in a precarious position. His vassals might feel freed from their oaths of fealty. His enemies might sense weakness. For him, a pilgrimage became the ultimate recourse, a dramatic appeal for absolution not just from God, but from the spiritual authority of the Church and by extension from his own people. You would watch as he stripped himself of regal garments, perhaps even walked barefoot through the snow, as some famously did, a deliberate theatrical gesture designed to evoke pity and secure forgiveness. The image of the crown bowing before the cross was a potent one, demonstrating a king's submission to divine will, a vital act to restore his legitimacy in an age where divine right was paramount. You see how these pilgrimages functioned as political instruments, tools wielded by both secular rulers and the papacy. The Pope, for example, could mandate a pilgrimage as a condition for lifting an excommunication or an interdict, effectively using the spiritual power of the journey to enforce political obedience. Imagine the pressure on a recalcitrant lord, his lands under interdict, his people denied the sacraments. He had little choice but to embark on the path of penance, his journey a public admission of error, a visible act of submission to papal authority. These journeys also served as crucial diplomatic opportunities. Imagine the long, arduous travel, bringing rulers and their entourages into contact with other kingdoms, dukedoms, and powerful churchmen. These were not just routes of piety, they were corridors of communication. Along these paths, alliances could be forged, treaties negotiated, marriages arranged, and disputes settled. You might see the King of France and the King of England, normally fierce rivals, meeting at a sacred shrine, ostensibly for prayer, but in reality engaging in clandestine talks, their spiritual endeavor masking strategic discussions of power, land, and future conflicts. The shared devotion provided a neutral ground, a sacred truce, however temporary, for the hard realities of politics to play out. The very routes of pilgrimage themselves held political significance. Control over a major pilgrim road, or over the shrine at its end, conferred immense power and wealth. Local lords and monastic orders vied for influence, building hospices, providing protection, and levying tolls on the thousands who passed through their lands. You would see the prosperity that followed these routes, the markets that sprang up, the communities that thrived on the constant flow of pilgrims. For a ruler, securing these paths meant economic advantage, a source of revenue, and a visible demonstration of their ability to maintain order and protect the faithful. It was a tangible expression of their sovereignty. Even the destination itself could be politically charged. Jerusalem, the holiest of sites, became the focal point for the Crusades, which were arguably the largest and most complex political pilgrimages in history. The call to take the cross, to journey to the Holy Land, was a powerful tool used by popes to unite squabbling European lords, to redirect their internal conflicts outwards, and to expand the influence of the Latin Church. You would hear the impassioned sermons, urging men to leave their homes, their families, their earthly possessions to fight for Christ. This was not merely a spiritual quest, it was a military expedition cloaked in religious zeal, a grand political strategy to reclaim territory and assert dominance. The promise of spiritual reward was intertwined with the allure of worldly glory, land, and riches. Pilgrimages could also be a subtle form of political exile or house arrest. A troublesome noble, a defeated rival, or a powerful figure whose influence needed to be curtailed might be encouraged to undertake a lengthy pilgrimage, effectively removing them from the political scene for an extended period. You might see a once powerful baron, stripped of his lands and titles, embarking on a seemingly pious journey that was, in reality, a form of banishment, a way to keep him out of sight and out of mind until his influence waned or a new political order was established. For queens and noble women, pilgrimages held a different, though equally political, significance. A queen struggling to conceive an heir might undertake a pilgrimage to a Marian shrine, a desperate public plea for divine blessing that also served to demonstrate her piety and commitment to her dynastic duties. You would see her leading a procession, perhaps barefoot, her visible devotion a message to her court and her people, assuring them of her dedication and hope for the kingdom's future. Her journey was a public act of supplication, a symbolic effort to secure the succession, the very stability of the realm. Even after death, the political utility of pilgrimage continued. Royal tombs became destinations for pilgrims, cementing the legacy of monarchs and reinforcing the divine right of their successors. The cult of a sainted king or queen could be a powerful unifying force for a kingdom, creating a sense of shared identity and loyalty around a divinely chosen lineage. You might find yourself among crowds venerating the tomb of a saintly monarch, their very presence there a testament to the enduring power of the crown, even in death. The very fabric of medieval society, with its deeply ingrained religious belief, made pilgrimage an indispensable tool in the arsenal of power. It allowed rulers to display humility while reinforcing their authority, to atone for sins while strengthening their legitimacy, to engage in diplomacy under the guise of piety, and to consolidate control over land and people. You see how the dusty roads and sacred shrines, while paths of personal devotion for many, were simultaneously grand stages for political theater. The act of pilgrimage, for kings and popes and powerful lords, was a careful calculation, a strategic move designed to secure alliances, appease the heavens, silence critics, and ultimately consolidate power. The spiritual journey for these figures was often a means to a very temporal end. It was a profound paradox, an act of self-abnegation that could lead to immense worldly gain, a testament to the intricate dance between faith and power that defined the medieval age. The crown bowed to the cross, yes, but often only to rise again, stronger and more secure in its earthly dominion. The dark secret here was not merely the exploitation of the pilgrim's faith, but the very weaponization of devotion for political ascendancy. The spiritual journey, in the hands of the powerful, became a formidable political gambit. You have seen how the grand designs of kings and popes twisted the sacred path into a political tool. You have glimpsed the hidden machinery of power behind the veil of devotion. But now you must turn your gaze from the gilded thrones and the intricate dance of worldly ambition to the very ground beneath your feet, to the dirt and the stones of the pilgrim's road. For while the powerful leveraged the journey for temporal gain, the ordinary pilgrim, the pious soul seeking solace or salvation, faced a different, far more brutal reality. The dark secret here is not one of manipulation, but of immense, pervasive suffering and death. You walk with him now. You feel the same grit of the road beneath your worn leather shoes, the same relentless sun beating down upon your head. The air is thick with dust, sweat, and the faint, unsettling scent of unwashed bodies and fear. This is not the clean, hallowed path of legend. This is a journey through a world indifferent to your spiritual yearning, a world teeming with perils that could, and often did, claim your very life long before you reached your sacred destination. Consider the landscape itself. You are traversing vast, untamed territories, often far from the meager comforts of civilization. There are no smooth, paved roads stretching effortlessly from one sanctuary to the next. Instead, you follow winding tracks, little more than animal trails in places, carved through dense forests, across treacherous mountains and over swift, unbridged rivers. You grip your staff tighter as you navigate a narrow pass, the wind whipping at your cloak, the sheer drop to one side a constant, chilling reminder of your vulnerability. A single misstep, a moment of exhaustion, could send you plummeting to your death. And the weather. You are at the mercy of the elements. You shiver as an unexpected autumn storm descends, turning the path to a quagmire of mud, the biting wind promising hypothermia. You huddle with your fellow pilgrims under the meager shelter of an ancient oak, the rain soaking you to the bone, your teeth chattering. In the summer months, the relentless heat saps your strength, dehydrates your body and cracks your lips. Water is often scarce, tainted, or entirely absent. You learn to ration every drop, to push past the gnawing thirst, knowing that to falter is to invite collapse. Exposure to extreme cold or heat claimed countless lives, their journeys ending, not with a prayer at a shrine, but with a silent, frozen or sun-baked stillness on an anonymous roadside. But the elements are not your only or even your greatest adversary. Disease, the silent, invisible killer, stalks the pilgrim routes with a terrifying efficiency. You hear the hacking coughs, the moans of fever, the gut-wrenching sounds of dysentery echoing through the makeshift camps at night. You watch as a fellow traveler, a vibrant young woman just days ago, succumbs to a sudden virulent illness, her eyes glazed over, her breath rattling. There is no doctor here, no medicine to speak of beyond a few herbal remedies and desperate prayers. The close proximity of hundreds, sometimes thousands of pilgrims, often weakened by hunger and fatigue, created a perfect breeding ground for contagion. Smallpox, typhus, dysentery, the sweating sickness and the terrifying specter of the plague itself, could sweep through a group, leaving a trail of devastation. You learn to recognize the signs, to keep a wary distance, but often it is too late. The air itself seems to thicken with unseen threats. Bodies, too numerous to count, were simply left where they fell, sometimes buried in shallow, unmarked graves, sometimes not at all, a stark testament to the speed and ruthlessness of these medieval scourges. The sanctity of the journey offered no immunity, no protection from the plague's indiscriminate grasp. Then there is the ever-present menace of human depravity. The pilgrim roads, despite their sacred purpose, were also highways for brigands and outlaws. You walk with a constant knot of apprehension in your stomach, your hand instinctively going to the small purse at your belt, or the rough wooden cross around your neck. The forests provide ideal hiding places for those who prey on the vulnerable. You hear hushed rumors of ambushes, of travelers stripped of their meager possessions, beaten, even murdered. A sudden rustle in the undergrowth sends a jolt of fear through your heart. You quicken your pace, your eyes scanning the tree line, praying for the sight of a distant village or a fortified monastery. Imagine the terror of being set upon, of fighting for your life or simply surrendering your last coin, your last morsel of food, perhaps even your cloak, leaving you even more exposed to the elements and starvation. For many, robbery was a death sentence in slow motion, condemning them to freeze or starve further down the road. It was not uncommon for pilgrim groups to travel together, seeking safety in numbers, but even large parties could be overwhelmed by determined bandits. The promise of spiritual reward offered little defense against the sharp edge of a blade. And hunger itself was a relentless companion. You experienced the gnawing ache in your stomach, the dizziness that comes with too many days on too little food. Provisions were difficult to carry, expensive to buy, and often spoiled quickly. You rely on the charity of others, on the meager hospitality of scattered villages, or on whatever wild berries or roots you can identify. The scarcity of food was a constant source of anxiety, and for many, it was the ultimate cause of their demise. Malnutrition weakened the body, making it susceptible to every disease, every chill, every exertion. You witnessed the gaunt faces, the hollow eyes, the desperate pleas for a crust of bread. The journey was also incredibly demanding physically. You push your body to its limits, walking for days, weeks, months, sometimes even years. Your feet are a mass of blisters and sores. Your muscles ache with a deep, persistent throb. Sleep is often minimal, uncomfortable, and interrupted. You camp in the open, exposed to the elements, or cram into overcrowded, unsanitary hospices where rats scurry in the shadows. Exhaustion was a slow, insidious killer, making you prone to accidents, weakening your immune system, and eroding your will to continue. Many simply collapsed, unable to take another step, their pilgrimage ending in a quiet, lonely defeat. The dark secret of the Pilgrim's Pall is the sheer, brutal frequency of death, the anonymity of it, and the almost casual acceptance of it as part of the journey. For every soul who reached a sacred shrine, perhaps 2 or 3 perished along the way. They died from illness, from accidents, from hunger, from violence, from exposure, their bones often left unburied, their stories untold, their names forgotten by all but perhaps a few loved ones back home. Their pilgrimage, meant to bring them closer to God, instead brought them to an early grave, far from the comforting rituals of their village church. You ponder this as you trudge onward. The spiritual zeal that propelled these masses forward was immense, a faith so profound it could compel individuals to face such overwhelming dangers. But you also see the desperation, the absolute lack of alternatives for many, the hope that a divine intervention might cure a chronic illness, or absolve a grave sin. For these ordinary people, the journey was a profound gamble with their very existence. They were not wielding pilgrimage as a political weapon, but as a last, desperate act of devotion and hope. The hospices, those rare havens offering a bed and a meal, were often overwhelmed, rudimentary, and could do little for the truly ill or the dying. They were temporary reprieves, not sanctuaries from death itself. You see the rough wooden crosses nailed to trees along the path, or the small cairns of stones marking where someone's journey ended. These are the countless, nameless memorials to those who fell. The very road itself becomes a vast, open graveyard, its dust mixed with the remains of generations of pilgrims. This was the price of devotion for the common medieval man and woman. A journey fraught with peril, where every step was a defiance of death, every sunrise a small victory. The dark secret, then, is the silent, pervasive toll of the road, the immense human cost of seeking salvation in a world utterly unforgiving. It was a pilgrimage of suffering, a testament to enduring faith, yes, but also a stark reminder of the fragile thread by which life was held in the medieval age. The sacred journey for countless souls was a path directly to the grave. The sacred journey for countless souls was a path directly to the grave. Yet, the gravest dangers often wore the guise of human kindness, cloaked in the deceptive warmth of a hearth fire or the promise of a safe bed. You have walked for days, perhaps weeks, battling the elements, enduring hunger and grieving the fallen. Your body aches with an exhaustion that seeps into your very bones. As dusk descends, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and orange, a flicker of light ahead promises salvation. An inn, a hospice, a place of rest. You quicken your pace, a surge of relief washing over you. This is what you have longed for. A roof over your head, a meal to quiet your gnawing stomach, and a few hours of unbroken sleep. This is the unholy hospitality of the medieval pilgrimage, a place where succor could swiftly turn to sorrow, and Christian charity could be a thin veil for vicious exploitation. Imagine yourself now, pushing open the heavy wooden door of a roadside inn. The air inside is thick with the smell of stale ale, wood smoke, and unwashed bodies. Faces turn towards you, some curious, some indifferent, some with eyes that lingered too long on the small pouch at your belt or the quality of your cloak. You are a pilgrim, yes, but you are also a target. You carry whatever worldly possessions you own, often including money saved for offerings or small, precious tokens from home. You are far from the protection of your village, your lord, your family. You are vulnerable. The common room is a cacophony of voices, drunken laughter, hushed conversations, the clatter of tankards. The innkeeper, a burly figure with a greasy apron and a calculating gaze, gestures you towards a rough table. You order a measure of ale and some bread, perhaps a piece of salted meat if you can afford it. As you eat, you try to discern friend from foe. Who here is merely seeking warmth, and who is seeking opportunity? The medieval road was a vast network, and not all who traveled it were on a holy quest. Thieves, cutthroats, and desperate souls often congregated in these wayside establishments, knowing that weary pilgrims were ripe for the plucking. Your very piety made you a target. You were expected to carry offerings for shrines, to buy candles, to give alms. This meant you were likely carrying coin. And your devotion made you trusting, perhaps even naive. Consider the simple act of choosing a bed. In many inns, particularly the cheaper ones, you would share a common sleeping room, or even just a pallet on the floor with strangers. Your few possessions would be bundled close, perhaps tucked under your head as a makeshift pillow. Sleep, when it finally came, would be a fitful thing, punctuated by snores, coughs, and the shifting of unfamiliar forms in the darkness. You might wake to find your purse lighter, a valuable item gone, or the unsettling knowledge that someone had been rifling through your meager belongings while you slept. But the dangers extended beyond mere theft. Unscrupulous innkeepers were known to collude with local bandit gangs. They might mark a wealthy-looking pilgrim, perhaps with a prearranged signal, and then inform their confederates of your departure time and route. You would leave the inn, believing you had a safe night behind you, only to be ambushed a few miles down the road, your journey ending not in salvation, but in a brutal robbery or even murder. The concept of hospitality, which was deeply rooted in Christian tradition, was twisted into a cruel parody. Pilgrims, traditionally deserving of succor and protection, found themselves exposed to greed and violence in the very places meant to offer refuge. The ale might be watered down, the bread stale, the meat rancid, but the prices would be exorbitant. If you complained, you risked provoking the innkeeper, who often had a fearsome reputation and a network of equally unsavory associates. For women traveling alone or in small groups, the peril was even more acute. The unholy hospitality could involve forced prostitution, sexual assault, or being sold into servitude. The vulnerability of a woman on the road, far from any male protector, was a terrible burden, and many chose to travel disguised as men, or to join larger, more organized groups for some semblance of safety. Yet even within these groups, betrayal was a constant threat. Think about the psychological toll. Every interaction became a test of your judgment. Every smile, every offer of help, every stranger's gaze could hide a sinister intent. You could not fully relax, even in the presumed safety of an inn. You ate with one eye on your surroundings, slept with one ear open, and clutched your few coins tightly. The constant vigilance was exhausting, adding another layer of weariness to your already arduous journey. What could you do? To refuse hospitality was to risk sleeping in the open, exposed to the elements, to wild animals, or to other predators lurking in the wilderness. To accept it was to gamble with your life, your money, and your virtue. There was often no good choice, only the least dangerous one. The medieval pilgrimage was a constant negotiation with risk, and the inn, the supposed haven, was frequently one of its most treacherous battlegrounds. Stories of pilgrim disappearances were not uncommon. Sometimes a body would be found, stripped of everything of value. Other times, the pilgrims simply vanished, absorbed into the vast, unforgiving landscape of the medieval world, their fate forever unknown to their families back home. The roadside ditches, the dark forests, the abandoned huts, all could become silent witnesses to a pilgrim's final, terror-filled moments. This was not merely the isolated act of a lone highwayman. This was an ecosystem of exploitation. Ferrymen might demand exorbitant fees, then deliberately capsize your boat if you refused to pay. Bridge keepers, often little more than local thugs, would extort tolls. Even those who administered official hospices, supposedly charitable institutions, could sometimes succumb to corruption, skimming resources, charging hidden fees, or providing utterly inadequate care for the sick and dying. The unholy hospitality extended even to places meant for healing. You might arrive at a hospice attached to a monastery, hoping for genuine care, only to find yourself in a crowded, unsanitary hall where disease spread rapidly, and the attention given was minimal or even cruel. Your few remaining coins might be extorted for meager services, leaving you destitute and sicker than before. This dark secret reveals a profound moral failing within a society that championed piety. While the Church encouraged pilgrimage and praised the spiritual merits of the journey, it often struggled to protect its faithful from the very human evils that preyed upon them. The grand ideals of communal charity and divine protection frequently dissolved in the face of rampant greed and lawlessness on the ground. The road to salvation was not paved with good intentions alone. It was pockmarked with pitfalls, not just from the hand of God or nature, but from the cunning and cruelty of man. The medieval pilgrim, seeking communion with the divine, often found themselves entangled in the basest of human struggles, fighting not just for their soul, but for their very survival against those who saw their devotion as a weakness to be exploited. So the warm glow of the inn, the promise of shelter, often masked a deeper, more insidious threat than any storm or wild beast. It was a place where trust was a luxury you could not afford, and where the line between salvation and peril blurred into a dangerous uncertainty. The precarious balance between devotion and deception, salvation and peril, was not limited to the physical dangers lurking in dark alleyways or behind the welcoming smile of an innkeeper. There was a more insidious threat, one that preyed not on your purse or your body but on your very soul. The medieval world, though seemingly static and bound by rigid doctrine, was in constant flux beneath the surface. And the pilgrimage roads, those arteries of faith, paradoxically became conduits for ideas deemed deadly by the Church. You feel the familiar stones beneath your worn boots, a path you know intimately, yet it feels entirely new. The air, thick with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, is the air of home. But home, too, seems altered, shifted by the vast distance and time you have placed between yourself and its comforting boundaries. The journey is over, physically at least. You have walked thousands of steps, endured countless nights under strange stars, faced dangers both seen and unseen. Now, the spire of your village church rises against the fading sky, a beacon that draws you forward with a complex mix of relief and an unsettling sense of otherness. You are no longer the person who departed. The eager, perhaps naive, pilgrim who set out with a heart full of hope and a soul yearning for absolution is gone. In their place stands someone weathered, burdened, and profoundly changed. The physical scars might be obvious. A persistent limp from a twisted ankle, the gauntness of a body often deprived of sustenance, the lingering cough from a chill caught by a roadside fire. These are the visible marks, the badges of endurance that might even garner a certain respect from your neighbors. They are the understandable consequences of a demanding journey. But the deeper scars, the ones that truly define your return, are not visible. They are etched onto the landscape of your soul, carved by the crucible of the road. You carry the weight of memories you cannot easily articulate, experiences that defy the neat narratives of spiritual enlightenment. You recall the hunger that gnawed at your gut, a primal ache that overshadowed pious thoughts. You remember the fear, raw and visceral, as brigands stalked the edges of the forest, or as disease swept through a crowded hostel, claiming lives indiscriminately. These are not the tales you will share by the hearth, not the parts of the pilgrimage that fit into sermons of divine grace. You re-enter your village, the familiar faces turning to greet you. There is genuine welcome, perhaps curiosity. They see the weathered face, the travel-stained clothes, the scallop shell sewn to your cloak. They see the pilgrim returned, purified, blessed. But they do not see the hollow gaze that sometimes catches the light, the involuntary flinch at a sudden noise, the way your hand instinctively goes to the non-existent dagger at your belt. They do not see the ghosts of those you met and lost, the comrades who fell ill or simply vanished into the vastness of the continent. The very act of seeking penance, of fulfilling a sacred vow, has paradoxically opened you to new forms of moral ambiguity. You witnessed acts of both profound charity and shocking cruelty, often within the same day, sometimes from the same people. You saw pilgrims cheat and steal, priests who were less than holy, and merchants who exploited piety for profit. The world you encountered on the road was far more complex, more morally gray, than the clear-cut dictates of your local parish. Perhaps you spent weeks in a bustling city, a place of vibrant markets and towering cathedrals, but also of hidden alleyways, brothels, and taverns where forbidden ideas were whispered over tankards of ale. You might have heard tales of dissenting sects, of alternative interpretations of scripture, of questions posed that no priest in your home village would dare entertain. These seeds of doubt, once planted, are difficult to uproot. They linger, subtle and persistent, challenging the comfortable certainties you once held dear. You might find yourself questioning the very nature of your faith, not in a grand, defiant way but quietly, internally. Was it the prayers that saved you from the fever, or the strong brew of a local herbalist? Was it divine intervention that led you to safety, or simply a stroke of good luck? The sacred and the profane blurred on the road, making it hard to distinguish between true miracles and mere coincidence, between genuine piety and cynical manipulation. Returning home, you try to fit back into the rhythm of village life, but it feels strangely muted, smaller. The concerns of your neighbors seem trivial after the epic scale of your journey. Their talk of harvests and market prices feels distant from the stark realities of survival you face daily. You try to speak of the wonders you saw, the relics you venerated, but the full scope of your experience remains locked within you, too vast, too personal, too complicated to translate into simple anecdotes. And then there are the secrets. The dark secrets that you carry back, not as physical relics, but as indelible stains on your memory. Perhaps you were forced to commit an act you now regret, to save yourself or a companion. Perhaps you witnessed a crime and did nothing, paralyzed by fear or the anonymity of the road. Perhaps you fell into temptation, indulging in pleasures deemed sinful, finding a brief, dangerous solace in the arms of a stranger or the intoxicating haze of forbidden substances. These transgressions, committed far from the watchful eyes of your community, weigh heavily. They are the antithesis of the sanctified journey, the hidden costs of salvation. The Church promised spiritual cleansing, absolution. But for many, the pilgrimage left a different kind of mark. It could be a profound disillusionment with the very institutions of faith, seeing hypocrisy where you expected holiness. It could be a sense of being permanently adrift, the ties to your former life weakened, your spiritual compass recalibrated to a different, less certain true north. The venerated saints might now seem more distant, the rituals less potent, the dogma less absolute. This is the hidden cost of the medieval pilgrimage, the psychological and spiritual toll that defied easy categorization. While some truly found a renewed faith, many others returned carrying burdens that went far beyond their physical ailments. They brought back stories untold, doubts unspoken, and a profound sense of otherness that made reintegration into their former lives a challenge. You might develop a guardedness, a reluctance to fully open yourself to others, knowing the depths of human nature you have witnessed, both good and ill. The world now appears less benign, less orderly than it once did. The simple faith of your childhood has been replaced by a more complex, perhaps cynical, understanding of spiritual matters. The concept of sanctified is crucial here. The pilgrim was expected to return holy, blessed, cleansed. But what if the journey, instead of purifying, introduced new impurities? What if it exposed the imperfections of the world, of humanity, and even of the Church itself, in ways that were deeply unsettling? These are the scars beyond the sanctified. They are the testament to a journey that was far more than a spiritual walk. A journey that was a brutal, beautiful, and often devastating confrontation with reality. Your nights are no longer entirely peaceful. The sounds of the wind howling outside your cottage might morph into the cries of a sick pilgrim, or the rustle of leaves might become the footsteps of an unseen predator. Sleep offers little escape from the relentless replay of vivid memories, the faces of starving beggars, the stench of unwashed crowds, the chilling echoes of a stranger's scream in the darkness. You might find yourself constantly scanning the horizon, even in your own fields, a habit born from weeks of needing to be alert to every potential threat. The simple act of eating a meal might bring back the memory of gnawing hunger, making you either hoard food or find yourself unable to truly savor its abundance. The ordinary comforts of home are tinged with the memory of their absence, a reminder of the fragility of your existence on the road. The pilgrimage was a profound dislocating experience, a journey that uprooted you from everything familiar and forced you to confront the raw, unfiltered world. And while you may be physically home, a part of you remains eternally on that road, forever changed by its trials and revelations. The shell of the scallop on your cloak is a symbol of your journey, but the true symbols are the invisible marks, the silent transformations within. You are a survivor, yes, but survival often leaves its own indelible imprint. These are the untold stories, the quiet struggles, the enduring legacy of those who dared to seek salvation on the wild, dangerous roads of medieval Europe. You returned, but a piece of you never truly left. You are home, but you are not the same. And that, in itself, is a dark secret that few truly understand. The journey's end for you is a private reckoning. But for the medieval world, the ceaseless march of millions of pilgrims left a public, yet often unexamined, legacy. Think of it not just as individual quests, but as a vast, continuous human river flowing across the continent for centuries. Each drop of that river, each pilgrim carried a story, a burden, a hope, and often, a deep and unhealing wound. These wounds, though personal, collectively shaped the very bedrock of the era, casting long, dark shadows that stretched far beyond the individual's return home. Consider the landscape of Europe itself. The pilgrim routes, etched into the earth by countless footsteps, became arteries not just of faith, but of commerce, disease, and despair. You might think of the great cathedrals and hospices as monuments to piety, but look closer, listen deeper. What echoes from beneath their hallowed stones? What stories are buried in the very ground upon which they stand? The crypts beneath these grand edifices often hold the bones of saints, the very objects of your fervent devotion. But imagine for a moment, not the celebrated saints, but the forgotten pilgrims. The ones who never made it back. The ones whose bones lie scattered in unmarked graves along the dusty tracks, victims of bandits, illness, or simple, crushing exhaustion. Their unmarked graves are the true crypts of the pilgrimage, silent monuments to the journey's brutal cost. This brutal cost was often exacted by a system that capitalized on fear. The medieval mind, steeped in a pervasive dread of damnation, saw pilgrimage as a desperate gamble for salvation. This fear was a powerful lever, skillfully manipulated by religious authorities. You were taught that your suffering on the road, your penance, could shorten your time in purgatory, could earn you divine favor. This spiritual economy created an insatiable demand for pilgrimage that often overshadowed the practical realities of survival. The church, in turn, became an immense landlord and beneficiary, profiting from the fervor it ignited. This was not merely spiritual guidance. It was an intricate system of control and extraction. Indulgences were sold, relics peddled, and the very concept of spiritual merit monetized. The journey, intended as an act of humble devotion, often became entangled with worldly transactions. You contributed your meager coin to hospices and churches, bought overpriced amulets from street vendors, and paid for prayers from local clergy. Each transaction, each small sacrifice, further enriched the institutions that encouraged your arduous quest. This enduring legacy of spiritual capitalism, born from the fear of eternal damnation, left an indelible mark on the relationship between the common person and the powerful church, fostering reliance, and sometimes a simmering resentment, that would resonate for centuries. Beyond the spiritual and economic exploitation, consider the sheer physical dangers. The constant movement of vast populations while fostering cultural exchange also created fertile ground for suspicion and, more grimly, disease. Local communities viewed pilgrims with a mix of awe and apprehension. They brought news, goods, and sometimes plague. The Black Death, for instance, devastated Europe in part due to the ease with which contagions could travel along well-trodden routes. Imagine the fear that would grip a small village as a stream of emaciated, often ill travelers passed through. Each encounter carried the potential for blessing or blight. The legacy of these routes is not just one of spiritual growth, but also one of epidemiological vulnerability, a constant dance with death that silently shaped the demographics and fears of the continent. The psychological burden on those who returned, like yourself, was immense. But what about the collective psychological burden on society? Generation after generation embarked on these journeys, facing constant threats, witnessing unspeakable suffering, and confronting their own mortality daily. This collective trauma, never fully processed or acknowledged, surely embedded itself into the cultural psyche. It contributed to a grim fatalism in the face of hardship, but also a certain stoicism, an understanding of shared human fragility. The tales brought back were often stories of despair, of lost companions, of close calls with death. These stories, whispered by the hearth, became part of the oral tradition, shaping fears and beliefs about the wider world, making the roads more perilous, the strangers more threatening in the collective imagination. Even the objects of veneration themselves, the relics, carry a dark legacy of deception. The insatiable demand for holy objects led to widespread fraud. Bones were dug up from ordinary cemeteries and passed off as saints' remains. Fragments of wood were claimed to be from the true cross, despite there being enough such fragments to build several ships. You, as a pilgrim, were encouraged to believe in these objects implicitly. Your faith was tested not just by the road, but by the very authenticity of what you sought. The enduring legacy here is one of credulity and exploitation, a quiet scandal that undermined true faith for many, even as it reinforced it for others. The crypt, in this sense, holds not just the physical remains, but the buried truth of these deceptions, a hidden cynicism lurking beneath the surface of fervent belief. The echoes from the crypt, then, are not just faint whispers of the past. They are the deep, resonant vibrations that shaped the medieval world, creating patterns of thought, belief, and social structure that persisted for centuries. They speak of a relentless human struggle against fear, against poverty, against disease, against the very elements themselves. The pilgrimage was a crucible, forging not just individual souls, but the collective spirit of an age. And in that forging, indelible marks were left, some bright with piety, others dark with suffering and exploitation. You, the pilgrim, returned with your shell and your stories, a living testament to a harrowing quest. But imagine the countless others, the nameless, forgotten multitude, whose only lasting monument is the very ground they walked, the silent crypt of their unrecorded journeys. Their experiences, their struggles, their deaths, are the true enduring legacy of darkness for medieval pilgrimages. They are the untold stories embedded in the stones of every cathedral, in the mud of every ancient path, in the very air that hums with the echoes of a million desperate prayers and a million unhealed wounds. The dark secret, then, extends far beyond your own heart. It is woven into the tapestry of history itself, a constant, quiet reminder of the profound cost of faith in a world both miraculous and merciless.